Today's scripture reading comes to us from Isaiah chapter 7. Listen to this prophecy and hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Again, the Lord spoke to Ahaz. Ask a sign from the Lord your God. Make it as deep as the grave or as high as heaven. But Ahaz said, I won't ask. I won't test the Lord. Then Isaiah said,
Listen, house of David, isn't it enough for you to be tiresome for people that you are also tiresome before my God? Therefore the Lord will give you a sign. The young woman is pregnant and is about to give birth to a son, and she will name him Emmanuel. He will eat butter and honey and learn to reject evil and choose good. Before the boy learns to reject evil and choose good, the land of the two kings you dread will be abandoned. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Pai Patel is a curious young man, particularly about faith and the God who inspires it. He is on a quest to learn about the divine from any and every religious leader he can find, for he just wants to love God. Perhaps you have met Pai. He's the main character in Jan Martel's 2001 novel, The Life of Pai. Growing up in southern India, Pai Patel is raised on stories of the Hindu gods who dazzle mortals with their power. There is the story of the god Krishna, who as a baby holds the universe in his mouth, and the story of Vishnu, who comes to earth as a dwarf but assumes cosmic proportions and strides across heaven in order to win a challenge. They are stories, Pai explains, of God as God should be, with shine and power and might, such as can rescue and save and put down evil. But as a teenager, Pai discovers Christianity and is confronted with a very different portrait of God. Being the curious sort, he spends several afternoons sipping tea with a Catholic priest who introduces him to another story, the gospel of Jesus Christ. At first, Pai cannot fathom the God of whom Father Martin speaks. This Hindu teenager finds Jesus infuriating and intriguing and downright inconceivable. He balks at this Son of God and lifts up the great irony of our faith to his new friend, Father Martin. This son, Pai exclaims, this son who goes hungry, who suffers from thirst, who gets tired, who is sad, who is anxious, who is heckled and harassed, who has to put up with followers who don't get it and opponents who don't respect him. What kind of a God is that? It's a God on too human a scale, that's what. This son is a God who spent most of his time telling stories, talking. This son is a God who walked, a pedestrian God, and in a hot place at that, with a stride like any human stride, the sandal reaching just above the rocks along the way. And when he splurged on transportation, it was a regular donkey. The Son is a God who died in 3 hours, with moans, gasps, and laments. What kind of a God is that? What is there to inspire in this Son? Love, said Father Martin. Pai finds this unabashedly human God baffling, but eventually, with Father Martin's explanations, strangely compelling. Still, the question Pai poses to Father Martin is a wise and poignant one. What kind of a God is that? What is there to inspire in this Son? The son who goes hungry and suffers thirst is the one Isaiah announces in today's scripture lesson, or at least the one Isaiah prophesies. The son is the child we will come to call Emmanuel, because he shows the world that God is with us fully. As our lesson begins, it is clear we are entering a story that is already underway. The Lord has been speaking to Ahaz, reassuring this king that he and all of Judah have nothing to fear. You see, Ahaz is in crisis. He is living in a city under attack as the kings of Syria and of the now estranged kingdom of Israel move against Jerusalem. As readers, we are being thrust into a political drama, the details of which are interesting to Bible nerds and history buffs, but are not essential for our purposes today. The point is that Ahaz is shaking in his boots as hostile armies beat at the gates of Jerusalem. But Ahaz should have nothing to fear, for the Lord is with him. God speaks to the king through the prophet Isaiah, saying, "Do not fear, stand firm in faith." This is where we pick up the story, the words "stand firm in faith" still ringing in the king's ears. This is when God makes the unbelievably generous invitation we hear about at the beginning of today's lesson. Just in case Ahaz needs something tangible to bolster his faith, the Lord offers him a sign. Make it as deep as the grave or as high as heaven, God says. It is a stunning gesture. As one scholar puts it, the Lord of heaven and earth makes power available to Ahaz in a seemingly limitless manner. In other words, the cosmos is the divine playground, and Ahaz can request any trick in the book. Would you like to see me hold the universe in my mouth or stride across heaven? Ask and you shall receive. God's offer is one we would expect any person of faith to welcome with open arms. Goodness knows many of us have longed for a sign from God in our own moments of crisis. As the world crumbles around us, how we have begged the Almighty to gesture towards heaven and say, "What sign would you like to see?" Every once in a while, we all need something tangible to bolster our faith. But Ahaz refuses. "I won't ask," he says. "I won't test the Lord." It sounds like a pious response. It sounds like Ahaz has taken God's word to heart and is standing firm in faith. Who needs a sign? I trust the Lord to rescue me. Here's the problem. Ahaz is not standing firm in faith. We know from another account of this event that Ahaz has done the opposite of stand firm in faith. Rather than trusting God, he has run screaming into the arms of Tiglath-Pileser, the all-powerful ruler of Assyria. In his plea for help, Ahaz has pledged his allegiance and his gold to this foreign tyrant. He has put his faith in an earthly lord rather than the Lord of all creation. God has every right to turn away in exasperation and say, "Have it your way, you're on your own." But instead of brushing off this faithless king, God responds, as God so faithfully does, in grace. The Lord offers another sign. No, insists upon a sign. Despite Ahaz's rejection, God is determined to show the people of Judah that the divine presence is sure, that the Holy One has not and will not abandon this people in crisis. And this is where the passage gets interesting. The Lord of heaven and earth, who has given Ahaz his pick of any trick in the divine playbook, chooses a surprising sign for Ahaz and his people. The young woman is pregnant and is about to give birth to a son, and she will call him Emmanuel. This is the sign that God chooses. the birth of a child, of a helpless babe. The Lord of all creation, who tamed chaos and set the cosmos in motion, who commanded the sun to shine and sculpted mountains as if from clay, who fashioned the great sea monsters and enlivened dust with a single breath, this God chooses to act through a tiny baby with a powerful name. Remember, this is the same God who drew back the waves so an enslaved people could walk free, and who led the Israelites with pillars of cloud and fire. The same God who sweeps over a graveyard and stirs dry bones to life. As that curious teenager, Pi Patel, would say, this is God as God should be, with shine and power and might, such as can rescue and save and put down evil. But at this moment, this is not how God chooses to act. This is not the sign God picks. As enemies beat at the gates of Jerusalem and the people cower in fear, the Lord chooses an infant as the sign of divine love and grace. God does not choose shine and power and might, but vulnerability and weakness. If we did not know the rest of the story, we would stare in disbelief at Isaiah, God's messenger, just as Pi Patel must have stared at Father Martin and said, what kind of a God is that? What is there to inspire in this son? But we do know the rest of the story. And we know that Father Martin's answer is absolutely right. Love. Love. That is what moves the Lord of the cosmos to forego shine and power and might and be born in a stable, crude, and bare. And that is what has inspired such devotion from countless followers throughout the centuries. Love. This prophecy of Isaiah is probably not referring to Jesus of Nazareth. Most scholars agree that the language of this passage suggests the young woman is already pregnant, and the son she bears will see the end of this present conflict even before he's weaned. But we also know this promise to be true in another time, for another people in crisis. A young woman does give birth to a son who is Emmanuel, God with us. This child is a sign from the Lord for all time and for all people, a sign that God chooses to draw near to us in surprising ways. This is the greatest act of love the world could ever imagine, that God would give up power and might to become one of us, to enter into this world as a helpless child who soiled his diapers and kept his parents awake at night, who nicked his fingers on tools in his father's carpentry shop, who went hungry and suffered thirst, who grew tired and felt sad, who walked a pedestrian God with a stride like any human stride, who ultimately went to the cross and knew death that we might know life. God dwelled among us as the one we call Emmanuel, so that we might know there are no limits to God's love for us. Turns out it is a sign as deep as the grave and as high as heaven, even as it becomes manifest in the unexpected form of a child, a babe we can receive into our arms just as we receive him into our hearts. This is God with us, fully, truly with us, not in displays of power, but in the finite and the fragile and flesh and blood signs that we can reach out and touch. This is God with us, that we might recognize God in the times of crisis as well as in the everyday miracles of life, in cards that brighten your hospital room, and in longtime friends coming to your father's funeral, in a helping hand or a quiet listening presence, in water that washes over us, and bread that satisfies our hunger. God continues to show up in the unexpected, in the flesh and blood, in the weak and vulnerable, in the ordinary signs that God is with us. So what kind of a God is that? What is there to inspire in this Son? Love. Radical love.